let me just say, the industry, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, the telecom industry, has been very active in attacking individual scientists who came up with findings that they didn't like. And so there's been character assassination against a very large number of scientists. This thing really started with Dr. Henry Lai in 1994 when he started seeing DNA effects. And Dr. Lai has been important in other ways as well. And they've also attacked, had personality assassination attacks on all of these people that I've listed here. And I suspect there are others that should be included. And each of these people has had a distinguished scientific career. The only reason they're being attacked is because they had important findings the telecom industry did not like. So anyway, I've had recent attacks, and I take it as a badge of honor that that is the case. However unpleasant and difficult it makes the situation. So this document, the FCC is a captured agency. How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. This was published by the Harvard Institute for Ethics, and it tells you something about how the most important regulatory agency in the U.S. is supposed to be protecting us. In fact, is not. And so EMFs have higher effects in children than in adults. And there are 4 reasons why this is true. One is that children have much higher surface to volume ratios, so their tissues, including their brains, are more exposed to the EMFs. A second is that children have much higher densities of stem cells, and the stem cells are particularly sensitive to the EMFs. Has been discussed in some detail by Dr. Igor Belyaev. The developing brain appears to be especially sensitive to EMFs, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why that is later on. And young tissues have much greater extracellular water content than do older tissues, and that leads to deeper penetration of the effects, and this has been discussed by Dr. Deborah Davis. So there's, so we have particular concerns about Wi-Fi and cell phone tower radiation in schools for these reasons. And this is another issue that needs to be considered. Okay, now what I'm going to be discussing here are 8 possible, and I would argue highly plausible, EMF caused existential threats to our survival. In other words, each of these individually is, in my judgment, a potentially serious threat to our survival, and from effects of EMFs in people. And before doing that, however, what I will first discuss is 9 different very well documented effects of low intensity non-thermal EMF exposures. So these have nothing to, let me say, the FCC and the regulatory agencies and the industry only recognize heating in terms of effects. And as you've already seen, that's not the way EMFs work. So I'm going to talk about these. These are things that have been extensively documented, and some of these are central to the sort of nightmare scenarios that I'm going to talk about with regard to existential threats. Some of them are not, and so the ones that are the ones that are outlined here. So there are a large number of published review articles that basically show that EMFs produce lowered fertility. And so they change the structure of the testis and the ovaries. They produce lowered sperm count, motility, and quality. And I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. A lowered number of follicles and increased spontaneous abortion, lowered levels of the 3 sex hormones, lowered libido. So almost anything you can think of that has to do with fertility is negatively impacted by EMFs. The good majority of the studies have been on male fertility, and I'm going to talk about those in at least a little bit of detail later on, because male fertility is much easier to study, and that's part of that's the main reason why it's been more studied. But we have, as I say, there are effects in females as well that are demonstrated in animal studies and in some cases in humans. There are also neurological and neuropsychiatric effects. There are 35 reviews on those. There are many changes in neurotransmitter activity. The things that I'm going to concentrate on, and I'll discuss them later on in a little more detail, are what appear to be the neuropsychiatric effects: insomnia, fatigue, depression, headaches, lack of concentration, cognitive dysfunction, anxiety, agitation, memory dysfunction, etc. I mean, these are all things that, as I think you all know, are very common in our society. We complain about them all the time. We know they're caused by EMFs, and nobody pays any attention to them. Well, that's a slight exaggeration, but it's pretty close to true. There are also cellular DNA damage of 3 different types, and I'll talk about these as well later on. And these can have roles both in causing cancer and in causing germline mutations. And both of those are extremely important. You get increases in apoptosis, programmed cell death, 16 published reviews on that. You get oxidative stress and free radical damage. We already talked about those a bit from the peroxynitrite pathway. You get endocrine, that is hormonal effects. And as far as I can tell, every single hormone system in the body is impacted by EMFs. Not always the same way. You do get effects, both the non-steroid and the steroid hormones, and are affected and by EMFs. You get excessive intracellular calcium, which, as I've already told you, is probably the underlying cause of almost everything else. Not quite. In fact, some of the studies have shown that the sodium channels can be important as well in producing some effects, some specific effects. I won't talk about those. The cancer, you get, there are 44 published reviews arguing that cancer is caused by EMFs, and that it involves the initiation of carcinogenesis. Those are the DNA effects, tumor promotion and progression, including increased tissue invasion and metastasis. The whole pattern, the whole gamut of things that are involved in cancer causation are stimulated by EMFs. There are 44 reviews on that. The only reason why we're still arguing about whether EMFs cause cancer is because the industry has so much money and so much power that they can, I mean, there's been huge numbers of review articles that have shown there's a very large and diverse literature showing that EMFs do all of these kinds of things. There are cardiac effects on the electrical control of the heart, and I'll talk about those also in some detail as we go on. And so these are not the only things that EMFs do. In fact, I'll talk about some other things that they do later on. But these are the ones that are most extensively documented. And I think they're obviously very important, each of them individually.